All right, I think we are just about ready to get started. So hello everyone on Zoom or Facebook. Welcome everyone. I'm Ariel Ehrman, a volunteer for Taste of Science Houston, and thank you all for joining us today for our second annual Science and Sonnets event. Normally we'd have this event in April during the Taste of Science Festival, but since that was canceled due to COVID, we are doing it online a little bit later instead. So normally, just a little bit about us before we kick off the event. Taste of Science is a national nonprofit. We have local chapters in different states all around the country, and we're dedicated to fun and accessible science outreach. So normally we would have our events at a bar or something like that where you could grab a beer. So again, before we get started, feel free to grab yourself a drink, non-alcoholic or alcoholic, before we get into it here. You can find us at tasteofscience.org or on Instagram or Facebook. And we've partnered today with the Poison Pen reading series. Two of our readers, BJ and Erika, are with Poison Pen or have read for Poison Pen before. Josh has also read for Poison Pen before. Josh, who I'll introduce momentarily, they created a computer program that essentially writes poetry. I'm probably not explaining that as well as they're about to. But we have 3 poets performing today: Erika Jo Brown, Rahul Rao, and BJ Love, and they'll be reading their own original works with some AI poems, and you'll have the opportunity to try to guess which poems are art and which are artificial. So I suggest grabbing a piece of paper and a pen if you don't have one near you, just to kind of jot down which ones you think are AI written and which ones you think are human written, to kind of keep track of them. After each poem, we'll go ahead and do a poll on Zoom if you're on Zoom. If you're not on Zoom, I encourage you to join so you can do the live poll. And we'll try to decide which one's human and which is AI. And then after the event, we'll also have a survey available. So if you like the event, have some suggestions, have other topics you want us to cover, keep an eye out on the event page for that survey. And let's get right into it. So Josh Irvin Davis is an artist and engineer from Texas whose practice incorporates sculpture, performance, writing, sound, and video, and their research interests span a wide spectrum of topics in human-computer interaction, or HIC. Their recent creative projects explore the relationship between emerging technologies, social relationships, and identity. So they currently live in Hanover, New Hampshire with their cat Nocturne, where he's pursuing a PhD in computer sciences at Dartmouth. Josh, not the cat, though that would be impressive. You can check out Queen of Parts on Twitter and Instagram, and that's Queen with a KW, to see more work from them. And you can also check out the Night Air Poetry Project at thenightair.com, which is a really, really cool interactive poetry project that they'll talk a little bit more about. So Josh, go ahead and give us a crash course on AI poetry.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ariel. And just real quick, thanks to Ariel and the whole Pint of Science Houston team, as well as Poison Pen, Erika, BJ, Rahul, and the other readers. It's really, really lovely to be here, and thank you for putting all of this together. And also thank you all for joining us today in this virtual room while we're going to talk about AI writing poetry in the middle of a plague. Wow, the future's strange. The Jetsons misled me dramatically as a child. So I'd like to just give a brief kind of history of computational poetry, and then talk a little bit about the algorithm that was used tonight to generate the poems that will be, some of the poems that we'll be hearing, and then maybe mention some contemporary computational poets working in this field. The idea of computational poetry really isn't a new thing, and neither is the hype. In the 19th century, there was this sensationalist French newspaper that released an article about a chair that could write poetry, and it was going to put all writers out of business, and poets would never be able to write again, and it was going to radically alter our world. And And here we are about 200 years later, and we hopefully haven't, robbed poets of their lucrative poetry writing jobs. Fairly recently, in an interview to kind of attest to this, Patti Smith, when asked what is one thing she would like to say to the world, she said there are more poets living and writing today than in any other time in history. So I think at a minimum, we can at least trust Patti in believing that this magical chair did not put all of our poets out of business. But nonetheless, AI was largely as a field was founded by the queer mathematician Alan Turing, and he proposed this idea of the Turing Test in the early to mid 20th century, where he said that if a human being was able to have a conversation with if a human being was able to have a conversation with a machine and not be able to distinguish if they were speaking to a machine or a human, then this machine passed what he would call intelligence. So today, what we're going to do, and this is like our third or fourth year holding this event, is really do a kind of a creative test to see if these texts written by machines can compare with texts written by humans. Large advances of AI from our initial chair example and from Alan Turing's original work have made creating convincing human readable text a very real and very common thing. The algorithm used tonight is what's called a transformer. I'm going to do my best to condense into 1 minute precisely how this very complicated algorithm from 2017 works. Essentially, what a transformer tries to do is predict one word at a time in a sentence what word is supposed to come next. And to make sure that the sentence makes sense, it uses this mechanism aptly named attention. And attention is quite simple. What it does is it tries to figure out what words are most important and provide context to what this sentence is supposed to mean and communicate. And the way the algorithm learns what to pay attention to in a sentence is by looking at thousands and thousands and millions of sentences written by humans. Some contemporary, for the nerds in the audience, the algorithm tonight is based on the original 27 implementation by Vaswani et al. And it is a traditional transformer. Some contemporary examples of poetry written using this device include OpenAI, who most sensationally released a press release about their algorithm called GPT-3, which allegedly could write large paragraphs or even novels that were indistinguishable from human text. And it's true, the texts written by these algorithms are indeed quite impressive. It can make puns and it can make jokes that aren't even present in the text from which they trained from. But GPT-3, GPT-2, and its predecessors made by OpenAI are really all not that novel in the view of the AI community. Largely what they have is large quantities of data, which they've taken from the internet and shoved into this algorithm. And frankly, what we've seen often in machine learning is that large amounts of data do tend to produce better results because they better teach these algorithms how to write things. But one way we can think of this is not necessarily that these machines are writing these poems autonomously, but what they're doing is curating statistically text written by thousands and thousands of humans. So in a way, each of the texts written by this algorithm is kind of a common voice coming from thousands of humans in the past. Many of the computational poets that I really personally enjoy, their common goal isn't even necessarily to mimic human speech or human text, but to really embrace kind of the inherent aesthetics that the computer makes on its own by making silly grammatical mistakes or making nonsense. And it really highlights the joy of language in this particular way. A few examples that I'd like to mention include Nick Montefort at MIT, whose real interest is in seeing how much text can be generated from as few lines of code as humanly possible. For example, he has this one algorithm that generated an entire novel based only on 4 lines of code. And in this way, we can really look at this practice as an act of translation, where we create machines that translate the language of the computer into a language meant to be read by humans. or the language of data into something that can be readable and understandable or enjoyable by humans. Another is Everest Pipkin, who often uses machine learning as an active collaborator, and Alison Parrish, whose poetry often examines semantic relationships between words. One way we can think about this is every word has words that are related to it semantically in terms of meaning. For example, the word house and the word office might have the word semantically building in common. And we can build a web mapping every word to its relationship to every other word. And Alison often examines the relationships between these texts. One notable work includes Frankenstein Genesis, where she took the entirety of the text of Frankenstein by Mary Shelley and the entirety of the text of Genesis from the Bible, and found the semantic similarity between these two texts. And really what I think Alison's work brings our attention to is a definition of poetry, which I find quite interesting. It's that poetry tests the limits of what language is capable of, especially when it's read by another human. I think I've babbled enough. I'd be more than happy to answer any questions that you have at the end of this section. You may also, of course, reach out to me. I would like to, of course, mention before I disappear for a while and let the poets read some work, is I've collaborated with an artist named Sarah Sudoff to launch the COVID poetry project called The Night Air, which is at thenightair.com, which essentially is a giant game of Exquisite Corpse. Exquisite Corpse is a surrealist parlor game, which was created by the French surrealist writers in the early 20th century to try to democratize poetry. And so what this site allows you to do is create a collaborative poem with every visitor who comes to the site by answering questions about your experience during COVID, during quarantine, and during isolation, in order to try to find some solace and some community in this exercise of writing a collaborative poem together. It takes less than 2 minutes of your time if you're interested in participating. That's at thenightair.com. Thank you so much. Let's hear some poems.
Thank you, Josh. That was awesome. And again, please stick around towards the end of the event after the poets perform. Josh will be answering some Q&A. So if you have any questions, like I said, go ahead and jot those down. And we'll be keeping an eye on the comments and things to ask Josh your questions afterwards. So our first poet is Erika Jo Brown. They're the author of the poetry collection I'm Your Huckleberry and part of the Poison Pen reading series. And she earned her PhD from the University of Houston and a Master of Fine Arts from the Iowa Writers Workshop. She teaches in the English department at Honors College at the University of Houston currently and at MD Anderson Children's Cancer Hospital through WITS. So go ahead and grab your pen and paper to jot down what you think is human written versus AI written, and take it away, Erika.
Okay, hello. I am so delighted to be here in my house with you, and also extremely delighted to be doing this project with Josh, who is a brilliant and handsome person, as you can see. I'm going to read 4 poems. I know, and I also copied your style because I was like, what a good idea. Let's get some breezes. Okay, so here we go. I'm gonna read 4. You won't know what's from the computer. Number 1, For the Little One. Sitting in the rose-scented bathtub, I am always sick, rarely heroic. Here's what I can tell you. I have 1,000 ablutions. My brother, the surgeon, swings a bone cutter while I snack on sturgeon atop a fancy cracker. I ail with Greco-Roman etymologies, hemorrhoids, diarrhea, cirrhosis, little bubbles of pain, what the good doctor calls complaints. Symptoms can be managed, not cured. Symptoms brought on by a whirling dervish of worry, and I wonder, does a Sufi ever stub his toe and think, why me? And I wonder if my friend is really pregnant. Why else wouldn't she touch the champagne? And if she is, I'll spend money I don't, and from the looks of it, will never have, trying to show the baby phenomena adults just can't see. the joy of plush toys, a crisscross of hyphenated senses, an evening without irony, a bubble bath without pain. That's number one. Number two.
Real quick, Erika, let's go ahead and do a poll after that first poem, sorry. So I believe our wonderful tech people in the background are going to throw up a poll on Zoom, and I see it now. So everyone participating on Zoom, go ahead and vote on if you think that poem was written by Erika or written by an AI.
Or the little one. Diarrhea. Cirrhosis. Hemorrhoids. Ariel, will you give me the signal to go ahead when it's time?
I will. Just waiting on a handful of more results on that poll. So we have 10 answers so far.
Is it Ant? Is it Ant? Is he holding us back? Is it Rebecca? Is it Rebecca? Is she doing Matt Graham? It's Graham.
I am not sure. I can only see the percentages. I cannot see which people have voted already. But so far, Human is in the lead. And yeah, we're gonna cut it off right now. So Human was voted for 7 times, so 70%, and then AI was 30%, people thought. So do you want to reveal if that was your poem or?
Sure. It was me. It was me.
Right on.
I figured out all those weird words that have the double R's. All right. So the next one is self-portrait as financial district. Ahem. The language of commerce I know not about, but the financial district and I, we share a nautical history. We are not fun, nor are we inconsequential. We matter to some people's pockets. Our borders are a craggy mystery, squeezed at the top like a uterus, squeezed at the tip like a uterus. Within us are pleasure piers, the Patriot Dive, and carts of hot dog vendors. Sometimes there are happy hours, but then we are empty, cavernous. We are filled with ghosts of men in slate-colored suits and varying elegance of shoe. We walk down memories down Maiden Lane, where families watch movies in the summertime. Now there is a splendid park built on the uneven scars of disaster. This is Mannahatta, where a man becomes a bridge, where the faint smell of chum shifts provenance from traitor to trader. At night, we hum with the solitary clip of cobblestone, hushed headlines on discarded newspapers, the voices of people who have passed through us.
Oh, I'm trying to be dramatic.
Did it work?
No, it really didn't.
To those at home also, we are married. We are not just willy-nilly breathing in each other's spaces. We have been vetted to be this close.
And vexed.
Right on. We're just waiting on some more answers to come in for the poll. We have 10 answers so far. Alrighty. 91% of people thought that one was AI, and 9% of people thought it was human.
I got you. I can't believe it. Ah, there's a self-portrait like of a person, so that's
So that one was your poem, just to be clear for the audience.
Yeah.
Right
yeah.
on.
Yeah, but apparently it still needs some work. A little stilted, I guess.
person is shining through on that one.
Yeah.
Who's the speaker? It's a robot.
It's a robot. Okay, this next one is fire is a mouth made to eat itself. This flop house isn't big enough for the both of us. And it's burning, and it's swallowed by soppy flowers, cut by the rain, the falling of the sun, and the sighs that are all on the other side of the telephone line. The wooden days of summer burn too, and dress and hold the tools of dead men, while the roast being pulled off the bone is less in need of mending memories and more in need of the vines inside, like the wilderness waltzing its way back into our burning flophouse. After all, the telephone on this sadness is not a road. After all, you snapped out of my brown secret sound and screamed like a brilliant punch-drunk bell, like a diamond rain at midnight, still hungry, still scratch, and sown from seeds into names. And from names you grew song, cracked like lightning, lit like sparks burning meat from bones. Like a name can be burned from a body, white heaped diamond clouds, while the sky tilted on a stone. The cloudless sky, the sleepers, the bursts from your eyes, the body, this damned house, and this name, all, too, have their place in this fire. From the song slipping out of the body, how we can go from one space, one stone, to sound and name makes going far away from song. To the sound a name makes going far away from song.
All right, so our poll should pop up in a minute here. And let's see who thought that was AI and who thought that was Erika. Alrighty. Is this y'all's first like live show or anything since quarantine started?
Depends on what you count as show.
Does OnlyFans count? It's hard out here for an academic. I'm just saying. Desperate times.
Oh my God.
That's fair.
You guys can click on my OnlyFans.
Alrighty, so we have the poll results, and on that one, 54% thought it was AI and 46% thought it was human. So that was pretty close. Erika, would you like to reveal which was which?
It was AI. I'm so curious, maybe if people can write in the chat like why they picked what they picked. Maybe my performance is so convincing. It's
gotta be the performance.
That's what I think.
I am the AI. Could you imagine? Good job.
Like that's the punk the entire time. Erika and BJ are both robots. As well as Rahul.
You definitely.
I am not a robot, I promise.
I have no evidence to the contrary, Rahul.
My video has been disabled, but I promise.
I promise I am not a robot.
Right. When I'm doing like UH help on how to do Blackboard, and they're like, I'm not a robot, and I'm like, you fucking are a robot. Okay.
Live.
Alrighty.
All right, last one.
Yes.
So,
okay. Last one.
Mm-hmm.
Rebecca says there was a split. Okay. A bend. Let me just get this. Okay. A bend. Our durable bond winks and welches through silt and flotsam with wonder. It's us with a brand, an alternative band. Halt and do schist when your shy sweetheart needs a bump up the day ladder. I, his frau, and he, my fella. When night dunks, we go to our house, sweat and wait. When night dunks, our sickness remains elusive. When we were sworn in, we danced, were stern, wore jade through night and stage. You can't unsay it, entwined through a dear baldness. So dab, be bold, bald, be bageled, and weft with only refined rafters.
Yeah, that's a good one.
That was good. All right, so we'll do our poll. And while we're waiting, Erika, if you were a robot, what style of robot would you be?
The constantly malfunctioning kind, I guess.
Just reboot all the time.
Yeah. It's like, oh, that one needs a rest, needs a little break.
Alrighty, so we have our results in, and on that one, 60% thought it was AI, and 40% thought that poem was written by a human.
Well, here's the thing. I wrote it, but it's kind of cheating because it was a homophonic translation. So it was words by me, but a little bit not by me. So that was a trick. Okay, but
you can call that one Cyborgian.
Cyborg Manifesto, yeah.
I like it. All right, so thank you so much, Erika. That was amazing and enlightening. And now we will move on to our second poet. So our second poet, Rahul Rao, is a local writer, performance artist, comedian, and sometimes rapper that performs under the name Coyote Bloodbath. The project incorporates poetry over loop samples and rhythms, and is at the very least interesting to watch. They went to University of Houston for the creative writing program and have been pursuing their Coyote Bloodbath project for the past 5 years. And if you like what you hear, feel free to Venmo them at Coyote Bloodbath and look out for their album coming out this September. For this particular video, because of the nature of the video, because of the nature of the performance, I would recommend good headphones or good speaker if you don't already have that situation set up, because as I stated, they loop samples beneath their poetry. So in just a minute, we'll get that set up here.
So admittedly, it is pretty loud. You will be
also
able to
that.
I am yelling, like I am screaming in at least a few of them. Yeah, there's only 3 poems. It's gonna be pretty lit.
Alrighty. I am not sure.
All right, one second. Small tech issue. We're getting the sound right now, and that is a restarting. Everyone can see, correct?
Yes.
Like me floating into you, you floating into me. My name is I am the world's only Christian, the world's only Holy Ghost-filled man, according to Acts 2:38 in the Bible. God inside me can move my arms, my legs, my mouth. I see non-stop visions, my skin feels electric. Stay tuned, best jet friends. They say, and our definitions of best still don't run concurrently. The time of our oppressors is reaching ahead, and wrecks a white wave nearly dead, ready to crash into us like a drunk driver into a pole. But we aren't the pole, we are the professional dog walker in the park who let go of that Pomeranian's leash and has to explain why Bella has gore in her fur. And there was once a time when that crested wave was just a figure in the distance that some thought to be attainable. But now it is upon our shores, and we gaze upon the countenance of a hideous thing that half of us say they love because at least a quarter of us are contrarians, and more than a quarter of us really truly don't know any better. And frankly, who am I to judge? Maybe I'm just yelling for attention. Maybe I want to ride a pale horse too. And at the very least, Death Destroyer of Worlds can teach me how to ducky. But the difference between that writer and myself has a lot to do with color, in so much as I can fake being despicable, but I can't fake being orange. There was once a time when orange was still beautiful, and now I eat oranges vitriolically.
Which means there's a lot of spit, clenched teeth, and pursed lips. And there was once a time that the tallest building in the land was a testament to diversity, and now the tallest building is orange. I wondered how long I've been stuck on our past magazine. That's a classic example of gaslighting. Because I guess you assume that it was great for us before, but I don't even know what great means, and rock and roll is dead anyways. Oh, you didn't hear? Drunk driving accident. Crazy man.
But I think we all saw it coming.
All right, so we're about to pop up our poll. I believe that was the proper break for the first poem.
No, you're just supposed to let that video keep going. Just let it keep playing.
Okay, do we want to just do one poll at the end for the 3 poems for yours?
Yeah,
then?
that's fine. It's probably the best.
Okay, let's do that then.
This is the moment I'm waiting for. I have to do this whatever he was looking at, it wasn't me. It wasn't me. It was something he was afraid of. It was something to which he was attracted or which he found repulsive, but it wasn't me. I was not a man.
My body is a weapon, and that wasn't my choice, but I question whether anyone hears my voice anymore. And I'm glad you started now, but it should have started at least 4 score before. The 40 score on that reverse day when the enemy took the shore. My body is a weapon, forged in a flame sent by someone else, a smith who dulled the sword that could have saved the last breath, or at least when brandished could have made people show respect or fight back against a lace boot coming down on my neck. My body is a weapon. And with the way some people look, you'd think I was a walk-in nuke. And if I saw that too, admittedly, I'd be shook, but I know better. Because you could put me in Sperry's, pastel shorts, and an H&M sweater, and I swear it would be the same reaction, or at least close. Maybe coupled with a question of, are those even really his clothes? My body is a weapon, but not a Smith & Wesson type, more like a bladed edge brought to the gunfight. And can you even call 4-on-1 a fight? And the metaphor is one-sided because I don't even have a knife. Since those with guns would prefer I didn't exercise my rights, my body is a weapon. And simply existing is enough to receive their ire. And they'll pick me out from the lineup like a bird hanging from the wire. And until that scenario resets itself, maybe with the aid of a cleansing fire, my body is a weapon.
All right. So Rahul, do you want to state, what we'll go ahead and do is if you want to state the name of each poem, and I have them in front of me as well, and then we can go ahead and do a poll per poem, like we did with the others. Does that sound good?
Sure. The poems in order are called Past Majesty, How to Write About Ghosts, and My Body is a Weapon.
All right.
Also, at the end, it wasn't able to show it because of the video, but there's a quote by Kim Jones, who broke the contract. You can watch her deliver that impassioned speech on the streets of Minneapolis.
Yes, and that's a great speech too.
That's kind of the whole thing. I feel like I also may have like given it away visually. I didn't do some editing of a certain thing, which maybe might reflect in the poll. But other than that, also I feel weird. I don't have like a fancy office. I'm just sitting in my car.
Right on.
Yeah, like I don't really have like a spot to do this in. And it's hot. It's hot in these streets, but
it's brutal outside. It is brutal outside.
Yeah, I guess an explanation of the project might be helpful or sufficient. Oh, fuck. Okay. Poem 1. It's a poem written by AI or human? Human. Yes. Okay.
Yeah, the poll was 56% human and 44% AI was the guess. So that was a pretty close one on the first poem.
Oh, congratulations to the majority of those people. Yes, I wrote that. Have a lot of feelings about the current administration, but whatever, that's pretty apparent. Yeah.
I do too.
A lot of the point behind like putting poetry on top of music rather is that like, I don't know, the whole sometimes rapper thing, that's not even a tag that I have given myself necessarily. A lot of times at performances, because I would consider myself a performance artist, a lot of time during these particular performances, I get the compliment. I don't know if I should call it a compliment, but the nomenclature of sad rapping. hours. Fine. I understand. I get it. I do talk about my feelings and being like a person of color and being a queer person of color in a city, in a state that has not exactly represented me well. I mean, putting it to music is kind of my way of, I've been writing for over a decade. I've been pursuing writing as a career for most of a decade. And like, I have a very short attention span sometimes. So going to poetry readings is kind of like a mundane affair to me. And this is simply my way of trying to engage myself with an audience a little bit more. Because it's easier to kind of like put music on and then scream out stuff. And people get it. People fucking get that shit for some reason. And I think when the vibe is a little different, people are a little more receptive to the things that you were trying to say and whatever message you were trying to impart on an audience. Whether or not you were trying to impart a message on an audience is like a whole other story. But yeah.
Right.
I don't know. There's not really much to it, man. You take classes. You get bored with classes. You want to do something with this fucking degree that you have. Mm-hmm. So.
Right on.
Yeah.
Right on. Well, with that on our second performance, the How to Write About Ghosts, we'll pop up a poll for that as well. And that is one thing about doing an online event is it's not quite, and I'm sure as a performance artist you would agree with this, it's not quite the same as having a room full of people and the energy of all those people. You're just talking to a screen. And I know BJ mentioned that is the same with teaching, where it's a much different energy, where you're communicating with someone through technology versus actually having that energy being in the room.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I have done a few other performance art pieces in Zoom calls that have definitely not like gone well. Coupled with like a bunch of other, was that poem written by an AI or a human? Yeah, okay, everyone knew. Y'all knew. You figured it out.
Yep.
I forgot to change the font in that overlay.
So that was the hint that the font was different.
Yeah, it wasn't intentional. I kind of just was like, I need this overlay really quick. I have to layer something in After Effects. Let's just screen record a section of me just scrolling over this text, and then we'll put it over, we'll do like an image displacement thing over it.
Right on.
I have to shout out to the guy who helped me on my video a lot, but I probably, in retrospect, in rewatching the video, I was like, I should have maybe like changed that text or something. They'll know if we're really out here to like get the numbers.
And they did. So it was 78% of people on Zoom thought it was AI, and then 22% thought it was human written. So good job, y'all.
I mean, that makes sense. It's fair. Admittedly, Josh also helped construct like how that poem was put on the page. I should have, that's another thing too, I should have just like dropped the enjambment, but if I didn't, I wouldn't have known how to record it and then like what pauses that I needed to take. It was a whole thing that I had to do.
I get that. To be fair, I didn't notice the font thing. I only knew which poem it was because I had seen the AI poems before. Spoilers. But if it weren't for that, I think it flowed really well. And for the last poem, My Body is a Weapon.
Most assuredly that was human. Who thought that was AI? What a bunch of goofballs.
So that one was 88% human is what people on Zoom thought, and then 13% thought it was AI.
No computer has ever written the experience of a person of color yet. Until that happens, I will not believe in them.
That is fair. I would be surprised. But yeah. All right.
I mean, there's the data. The data is there. Josh, make something.
That's true, Josh. All right. Well, thank you so much, Rahul. We'll have all the poets pop back on towards the end too after the Q&A. But for right now, let's move on to BJ's poems. So BJ is a poet and teacher living in Houston, Texas. They're a graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop and past reader for the Poison Pen series as well. And his work can be found in the North American Review, Gulf Coast, and Hobart.
That's it.
Yeah.
Just 3 places. Thank you so much, Ariel, for having me. Thanks, Josh, for putting all this together. And thank you, Rahul, for your awesome work. And I guess thank you, Eric. I thank her every day.
Yeah, damn better.
By making her dinner every night.
I don't even do the dishes.
She doesn't.
Wow.
I just kind of take over and do everything. Okay, so I'm just going to jump right in. This first poem, I took a bunch of new work, so not a lot of these have titles, so most of the titles are just the first line of the poem. The government asked me to stop writing, to stop thinking about writing, to stop thinking about all the things I write about. Government officials routinely knocked on my door and asked to see what I was working on. It's important that you work, they said, but just as important is what you're choosing to work on. I wasn't expecting them, which isn't like me. Expectations is kind of what I do. Sitting on the table was a picture of my wife, and next to that, a poem about the time she'd placed her hand on top of mine as we looked over a railing into one of the natural wonders of the American West, the Grand Canyon maybe, or the cliff dwellings of the ancestral Puebloans, or perhaps one of the lesser known geysers of Wyoming. The point is, I don't know, and it doesn't matter all that much what we were looking at, just that we were together and shared a simple gesture of love. The government, though, deemed me wasteful of effort, and thus worth visiting every few days to check in on. Effort for the effortless, I said to the men as they read over the poem. One looked up and said that parts represented the American exceptionalism I expect in all works of art, but there were far too many lines wasted on the singular appreciation of the spouse. I rubbed my chin like I was thinking seriously about what he said, only I was really thinking about how after experiencing all the awe and wonder and love wherever we were, my wife and I stopped off at a tent on the side of the road and bought fry bread from a mother and daughter sitting in collapsible lawn chairs, standing only to lift bread out of the pan and hand it to you with a generous topping of powdered sugar. My wife and I stood there under the mountain sun, pulling hunks of it into our mouths and watching cars carefully twist through the switchbacks. Another car passes, and when I turn my head, I see her, and her fingers are in her mouth, and then she is looking at her fingers, and then her fingers are back in her mouth. It's a pretty basic human ritual, so much so that I start in on my fingers too. It's involuntary, like a yawn when someone else yawns, or how you can't help but scratch a dog under the ears whenever it walks up to you. We're going to need to keep this, one of the men says about the poem. I nod. The government has been taking all my poems for years now. This time, though, the last guy also picks up the picture of my wife and sticks it in his pocket. I gasp, like audibly gasp. All 3 government men turn to look at me. We'll be back tomorrow, one says, and pulls the door closed behind him. There's a layer of sedimentary rock in every canyon I've ever seen that is the exact color of my wife's hair. I open up a book we have documenting America's national parks and turn to a page about Utah. Her hair blows towards me in the cool afternoon breeze. I think about how it feels against my face when we lay in bed at night. I sit down in my workspace and pull out another sheet of paper and write, there's a layer of sedimentary rock in every canyon I've ever seen that is the exact color of my wife's hair. And before I can come up with what comes next, there's a knock at my door. And when I open it, 3 different government officials are there asking to see what I'm currently working on. I swing the door back as wide as it will go and point to the poem I had barely even started. You must stop this nonsense, the one in front says, signaling with his head to another to go and get the poem. We'll be back tomorrow, he says. You always come back tomorrow, I say. You must stop this nonsense, he says again, walking out into the white light noontime. You must. That was the first.
All right. So we have our pull up and we're getting answers streaming in. So BJ, same question for you that I asked Erika earlier. If you were a robot, what style of robot would you be?
I think I just want to be like one of those like repeating ones that just does the same thing over and over and over
How
again.
about a butler?
A butler. I would be like Rosie on the
Yeah.
Jetsons. I would have like one wheel on the bottom, and I would just scoot around the house, cleaning up stuff.
Right on. All right, so we have our answers in, and on that one,
Ah!
100% of people, nice. 100% of people thought that was human. So would you like to?
Yeah. Well, that's good. I'm glad that even though the government keeps coming and telling me I'm worthless. All right, this next one is called Creation Myth. I love this sadness. I'm the one on my hands and knees, searching for the lost keys in a moonlit locked room, and you just wait. The way you stood in the dark blue could be a poem. I swallowed the key, says the moon. The moon could be a man who speaks like a child. I hold my hands like a bow, held it over his lips, and looked quietly down into his mouth. I saw the time the day begins, its home, a deep blue. The same you, a deep blue. I have seen dust in his mouth. The way the sea stares through me. I straddle the seas. The waste remains. The moon does not smile. The sea scraped the black sky. I want to be a mirror in the grave, so you look at me to see the sky. And still, the moon can be a man, and the stars are still salt in his mouth. The man should be the moon. The woman should be the key. The deep blue should be a little grave. The poem should be so much more than the stars holding still while I speak, because there is no disaster the moon's mouth can't swallow. That was the end. Sorry.
Alrighty, I think, yep, we've got another poll going up. Have y'all been doing any particular hobbies or anything in quarantine, puzzles or?
I started like drawing a lot of basically like celebrities. Line drawings. I have like I drew. I'm a big Prince fan, and so I drew a bunch of pictures of Prince.
Right on.
To go along, and then actually I was in Vermont over the summer for like 5 weeks teaching, and when I came back, Erika had actually had them like the 4 of the Prince pictures framed. She's bringing one over now.
Nice.
Like this is early Prince. This is from like
right on.
Prince record. That was indeed. That was the AI poem.
Yes, so 70% of people voted that was AI and 30% said human.
Okay.
Not too shabby.
No. Although I feel like the whole thing is like a ruse. Like I'm trying to like be tricky with like every poem. I'm like, what would a robot say? Okay, so this poem is called like I didn't do a very good job of picking out poems that could be. All right, anyway. I was thinking today of all the Jewish poets I like, which is to say that I was thinking about the one Jewish poet that I love. Once, driving through Alabama, my wife and I stopped at a red, rusted-over gas station to pee and buy candy. They know I'm Jewish, she said to me, and I laughed and told her, nobody cares that you're Jewish, and I meant it, but not anymore. I now care very much that she's Jewish. I care that her feet are Jewish. Her hands and her hips are Jewish. I care that her freckles, her scars, her eyes. I care that her one snaggletooth is Jewish, that her other teeth are Jewish, that the place above her butt I rest my hand is very Jewish. The way she walks is Jewish, how her face crumples in on itself when she's sad or concerned or upset or in love, or when she looks at anything, anywhere, far off or up close because she has a bad eye, which is also Jewish, and which I also care about very much, even though it causes her so much grief. And don't even get me started on how Jewish her grief is and how I've grown to care about that more than anything in my whole life. They will come for me before they come for you, she says. A Confederate flag flying above a giant white cross off in the brown mud of rainy rural Appalachia as she quietly drifts off. We sit there like that all through Mississippi, Louisiana, all the way home to Texas. I tell her, I'm sorry for saying nobody cared that she's Jewish. I know they do, I said, but so do I. And that's it.
All right, that was very moving. We will throw up a poll in just a moment. And so far, everyone says human. We have a couple
Yo, if
AIs.
anyone says that's an AI, that's fucked up.
I would love to see an AI that could write a poem like that.
I felt like the AI did a really good job of like approximating contemporary American poetry, and I do not. Like that's
Yesterday, he was like, "Oh, this is like
I'm like a really bad contemporary American poet."
Thank you to the three of you. I have to say.
Who voted
27%?
All right,
No, I
yeah.
refuse to vote just because everyone else says that it's.
Yes, so we had 73% say human, and we had 3 people say that it was AI, which is interesting. So those were BJ's poems. Those were BJ's poems. Thank you so much. That was incredible. And just a little summary on those polls, since that was our last performer. So overall, we had like a pretty decent grasp of what was AI and what wasn't. There were a couple poems that kind of trip people up one way or the other. And I think that sort of gives us a good idea of, you know, sometimes AI does better than we think it does, and other times the humanity is just too strong to be mistaken for AI. But just because it's artificial doesn't mean it's not necessarily also art with a few human touches to it. So now we will go ahead and move on to our Q&A with Josh. And if you're ready, Josh, I will kick it off with a pretty basic question. What gave you the idea to do this AI program project?
Oh, man. I mean, like, it's just, I feel kind of what I was, when I talked about in the beginning, there's these previous projects that try to create something creative or something readable for humans using an artificial means or using an object-based approach. And it's, I don't know, I think it's interesting to kind of use as a gauge for how we relate to technology and how we relate to objects around us, and also use it as a barometer for gauging the relationship between technology and society currently. Also, it is just plain fun. Like, honestly, at the end of the day, it's really fun. Like, I know, like, for this event, the poems we wanted, you know, were kind of convincingly human, but my favorites are the ones that make no sense whatsoever. In fact, my favorite out of the 3 that we presented today was the one that frankly makes the least sense. And I think that was the one Erika read. There's a bit of gibberish and nonsense in it, and it has a crackle of language. And that's what I really like about computational poetics, is not when it necessarily mimics human speech, but when it maybe does something that's a bit unexpected and kind of draws my attention to just the aesthetic pleasure of language. Oh, Ariel, you're on mute.
Thank you. That's really interesting. And I also liked the mention of Alan Turing earlier, just as sort of a history nerd. That was a cool thing that I didn't necessarily make that connection because I haven't worked so closely with this material. But what do you think that someone like Turing would think of this sort of program that can replicate something like poetry?
Oh man, I bet I think Turing's a small hero of mine. I mean, we don't really have that many like queer superheroes in STEM, and Turing's definitely one of them. And so I think he'd be a fan. I like to imagine that he's a little odd, but would be quite pleased if we could create these machines that could create something that humans might think is beautiful, regardless of whether or not you think it's human or AI or human written or machine written. Just think it's beautiful and playful and fun to interact with. I think over dinner or drinks, he would definitely, at least at a minimum, find it amusing. I think there's some other implementations of AI that he might find a bit more alarming.
Such as?
But did you say such as?
Yes.
Oh God! All right, let's
just to play devil's advocate.
Yeah, let's open this can of worms. Okay, so facial recognition algorithms, for example, have recently been like not discredited, but basically been largely hated by huge parts of the research community, to the point where IBM, Microsoft, the Association of Computing Machinery have all declared that we need to halt doing facial recognition research immediately, because a lot of the applications of this technology have been largely deeply problematic. First we thought that possibly it was just that there's algorithms, for example, that use facial recognition technology to predict crime, for example. It takes a look at a person's face and can detect based on their face, allegedly, whether or not that person will commit a crime. And just from me describing that to you, you can clearly tell that not only did Philip K. Dick tell us a long time ago this would be problematic, it's clearly problematic just using common sense. It's that these algorithms clearly are going to be deeply, deeply racist and prejudiced in their implementation. And at first, about 4 years ago, we thought that, oh, this is just the data we're feeding it, and that's problematic. But now we see that it's not even the data itself, it's how these algorithms are implemented. And so this has led to a large halt on the research of facial recognition technologies. There are some really interesting satirical projects that have come out of this. One that I should mention is the New Inquiry did a satirical project where, so one algorithm is that exists is it looks at neighborhoods where crime occurs, and it tries to predict where crime would occur in the future. And so this clearly is going to be biased towards certain groups of people, certain neighborhoods, and reinforce different kinds of stereotypes that can be downright systemically oppressive. So what the New Inquiry did was they created a similar algorithm that predicts white-collar crime and alerts you on your phone anytime you enter an area where white-collar crime may occur, and tells you to be careful because your financial market may about to be collapsed in your local area. So it's a brilliant project, and there's lots of other examples like this that kind of parody this, the problems that we see. And often this is what we see machine learning art and computational poetics are really good at, is kind of highlighting where in our culture there are blind spots that often are not seen by those doing research purely without paying an attenuative eye to how culture and society is implementing and receiving those particular systems.
Right on. Wow. One question from Matt. So Matt said, BJ had a little unsure narrator moment where the speaker couldn't remember if the moment happened at the Grand Canyon or someplace else. And I believe that's when Erika held up the Grand Canyon magazine, if I'm not mistaken. And do AI poets put in maybes and perhapses the way people poets do? I also like the use of the word people poets. But.
Oh yeah, no, even more so actually. Like kind of going back to what we were talking about previously with a transformer. A transformer basically, when it's trying to predict what word best gives the best context for the sentence we're writing, the transformer has like a huge dictionary of every single word it's ever seen, and it applies a probability or a maybe or a perhapsy for every single word it's ever seen based on whether or not that is the best context for this sentence. So essentially, one way we can look at this is that, yeah, these algorithms are built on maybes and perhapses in order to help them navigate and understand the semantic language of these systems. And again, it's my personal favorite stuff is when it messes up and fails and does something a little goofy and weird and fun.
Leading into that, someone asked, is there a big difference between GPT-3 and your phone autocorrect or autopredict?
That's a good question. So they're both sequence-based models, so they're similar in that respect. The main difference is that GPT-3 is basically, it's very new and it's largely owned by OpenAI, and they've been very protective over it. So what I'll say is that they're similar in architecture. So the algorithms are essentially the same, or not same, but similar. But what's different is that GPT-3 is fed a lot of different data. and it's fine-tuned and attenuated on different substances, whereas your phone autocorrect is going to be more trained on what you type. And every time you misspell a word or every time you tell it what to correct, you are feeding your phone and help teaching it how you type and what kind of words and autocorrects you use.
How does that not know that I mean to say fuck and not duck? I mean, honestly, this is a problem.
This is a deep problem. I 100% agree. We should have solved this by now.
I have used the duck emoji after that so many times just to embrace it.
Just because. It's almost to the point where ducking has become a curse word.
And sort of leading into that as well, so would feeding more poetry to the AI improve its ability? I think that's sort of how it's generated, but audience question.
Yeah, totally. I mean, like, that's basically how these poems were generated in the first place, was feeding it a large corpus of poems. And actually each of the poems was generated by a different model that was shown different types of poetry. For example, Creation Myth, which BJ read, was fed a bunch of poems by slam poets, which tends to be more performative, and versus Fire is a Mouth Made to Eat Itself, which Erika read, which was fed more page poetry or academic poetry. I don't know what that means. Page poetry, let's go with that. I've had a couple glasses of wine. And so it has a bit of a different aesthetic feel to it. And so feeding it more poems definitely would. Feeding it a greater variety of poems would probably create a bit more of dynamicism as far as the range of different kinds of sentences and phrases and enjambment to be able to construct. Usually with these algorithms, more data is usually better. And more data in a specific aesthetic tends to kind of strengthen its ability in that aesthetic. So if we showed it twice as many poems that were slammy, then maybe we get a poem that was more conventionally attenuated to a slam poem. Or if we showed it more page poems, it might be more attenuated to that. So generally, a rule of thumb with these algorithms is more data is better. Oh, Ariel, you're on mute.
Thank you. Can the AI poem be programmed to focus on sonic aspects of the poem? So I think this person means like how the poem would end up sounding when read aloud.
That is a great question. Oh my God. So yeah, so this is actually an open kind of investigation that you see a lot of computational poets looking into. There are libraries such as CMU's Sonic Library, which basically is an entire data set that is based around the way words are said. And there are computational poets that you see, such as, again, Alison Parrish, who work specifically with these data sets that attenuate to the way words sound. And so one of the common things that you see, or one of the common problems in this area, is trying to make words rhyme. And it is possible, but it's insanely hard because you essentially have to look for the similarity between how words sound. And that's not including I rhyme or anything fancy like that. That's purely just sonic similarity. And so, so there's a lot of work in this area. There's been incredible advancements. If you're interested, I can provide links. But it is an area that a lot of computational poets that I really, really love tend to invest heavily in researching.
Very interesting. So 2 more questions for you, and then I have a question for the people poets as well. So first, let's see. Matt said in creation, oh, nope. Sorry. Yeah, no, that's a new one. Sorry, I read one from Matt earlier. In Creation Myth, I thought I heard the AI poet use repetition. I don't have a question about it, just thought it was interesting. Is it? So like it rates how good a fit the word it chooses actually is and then puts a qualifier in front of it?
You mean in terms of like repeating specific words and phrases?
The second part was a response to something you said, sorry. So the first question is, they thought it was interesting that the AI poet used repetition. Does that common with a lot of the AI poems?
Yeah, so it's one of the things that makes a transformer a specifically useful and interesting architecture is because since its main goal is to, again, talk about this attention metric, it's, again, trying to find the word that best gives the context for each of these sentences as it begins writing these sentences. Since that is its principal goal, you'll often see those contextual words appearing again and again because our brains work very similarly, right? Like, I am currently speaking to you in a different sentence unrelated to the previous one, but because you know I'm talking about a transformer, that is the context in which you view this sentence through, right? And so this is really what this attention metric really measures, and what it's really useful for is that it's good at identifying what is the best context for generating text word by word going forward. And so oftentimes you'll see like this repetition is really common because you'll see it kind of gives our brains good context. And in this way, it understands how our brain pays attention to contextual words.
Awesome. And the second part of that question was actually in response to what you said about perhapses, and a lot of that actually being involved in the AI poems, which surprised me. I don't know how much of the audience was surprised by that, but they asked about the perhapses and the qualifiers and things in AI poems, if it rates how good a fit the word it chooses actually is and then puts a qualifier in front of it, or if it works in a different manner. Did I word that right?
What do we mean by, I guess I'm curious what they mean by the qualifier. One way you can think of this is that when it's creating, when it's trying to look at these different contextual words, it's basically going to give them a score on a scale of 0 to 100, with 100% being this is the context of this sentence, and 0 being this has nothing to do with this particular sentence. And it does that for every sentence with each of these words that it thinks might be good candidates. And oftentimes there's even some practices such as Everest Pipkin who plays with this idea of looking at the words that are second or third in this contextual list, like the runner-ups, for example, the maybes, the perhapses, that didn't quite make it. So maybe this sentence I'm talking to you now about is about probability or transformers, but it could also just be about gambling, because that also involves chance. And so you see these really cool kind of language and poetic efforts where they just switch to one of these other not as compelling contextual words for generating the next sections of their poems. Does that make sense? I hope that answers the question.
Yes, they said that does answer the question. So awesome. And then the last question we have for you today is, what do you think would happen if you fed the AI program its own poems and kept doing that? Like, what sort of thing, how would it end up generating, I guess?
Yeah, so there's a poet who's actually done this, or an artist who's done this named Mario Klangermann, based out of Germany, who did this with GPT-3. So what they essentially did was they just took the output and they fed it in over and over and over and over again. And basically what you see is it begins to focus on very specific instances that are really common. Because again, we have to remember GPT-2 and 3 are fed on text taken from the internet. So these are conversations taken from Reddit, from Wikipedia, from social media. And so what happens is as you continually feed this information into the network, it begins to focus on the most common issues and the most common occurrences that occur inside these conversations, some of which is quite problematic, but it gives a very interesting perspective on the common denominator of communication with people.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I know I've learned a ton today, and I'm sure our audience has too. And I do have a question for the people poets, and I'm curious about Josh's opinion on this too. For the people poets, has this project made you realize anything about the way you write? Or also, in addition to that, do you think that computational poetry has a place in serious poetry? So I'm not sure who wants to tackle that one first.
I will. One thing is that I put it in the chat, but there is a poet who wrote all these sonnets by an algorithm, like feeding it all these Shakespeare sonnets. And this was actually an incredibly useful tool to teach sonnets and form in poetry. So giddy up about that. And then the other thing was about how we, yeah, I mean, I guess you noticed your little quirks, and like mostly for me it was like sort of like the way a subject coheres felt different. So that's why that's something I learned. I mean, ideally my poems cohere a little bit idiosyncratically and tightly than the Pooters.
I think, like, for me, it's a matter of like perspective. And that's one of the things I always teach my students, is that like you got to figure out the place where you stand and how you see everything that's kind of out there in front of you, in order to know like what you can say about it. And I think, you know, what it means that like you have to recognize who you are, like whether it be by privilege or like your social status, or kind of like just where you are before you can kind of begin to put like descriptors on things and kind of know like where to pull them from. Because I think, as Josh was saying about, like, it gives context to what you're saying. And it seems to me like just these algorithms that are out there, just like pulling huge swaths of data from the internet, aren't really gathering any kind of perspective. They're just gathering up most frequently used words and in the order in which they're going. So it seems to me that kind of like was, at least in my own work, and I only speak for myself here, that, you know, like I feel like my poems rely heavily on my own perspective and how I think and feel and view things, and how much I love my wife. Yeah. Both. But you know, I got a sense looking at the two AI poems, because I got to see both of the ones that Erika and I read, that was kind of the thing that was lacking, right? There was a lack of like a coherent voice, that the speaker was kind of like, you know, announcing their presence from. That's all I have to say about that. I always feel like in these like Zoom meetings, you have to kind of like announce that you're done, and I'm done now. I feel like Forrest Gump the end of this conversation.
Over and out.
Yeah, I guess to the end of do I think there's a place for AI poetry or computated poetry? Most assuredly. It's really good. I don't know, again, like there's no particular through line, there's no sense of cohesion, right? But there are those, because in the How to Write About Ghosts poem, there's a lot of symbolic elements that are taken from like classic literature, and those kind of work together. So I don't know, I'm left with this feeling like if those poems had appeared in like fucking Percy Shelley like little novella or something, as like a undocumented work, just like in the manuscripts in his journal or something, people would have eaten it up. Yeah, I think there is a place for it. The things that I noticed in terms of where my own poetry stands from it, I would definitely say like it was not written with the intent to be performed, I think, or at least performed in the way that I would perform it. But even then, yeah, a certain amount of like editing had to be done to make it like, I don't know, visually acceptable and readable, right? So at the end of the day, like a human element was put on it, regardless of whether or not I had anything to do with it. So I don't know. I think we're growing closer to like a weird sort of melding situation where who cares whether or not people know it's written by a robot or not? I mean, ghostwriters exist in rap. Like, why can't like computers just write poems for us? And I mean, computers obviously taken with a curatorial effort, and I will assume the people who are doing it are being like good about the sourcing that they are taking from it. But yeah, why not? It's a new frontier. It's the future, man.
All right, and we do have one more question for Josh as well. Someone asked if AI can write in multiple languages.
I couldn't find the mute button for a second.
Oh, no worries. I've been there several times today.
The particular AIs I use cannot write in multiple languages, mostly because they were trained on a textual body that was in English. But there are AIs that do write in multiple languages. And in particular, one of the other tasks that Transformers, the architecture we use tonight, is especially good for is translation. And so there are a lot of projects invested in looking at different languages and how they can be implemented. I wish there was more because not all languages are represented in this particular context. But so I guess the short answer is my AIs cannot write in those languages because it has not been trained in those languages. But it is entirely possible to amass a data set of text in a chosen language and then train these systems on this language. There is some work that is quite interesting that examines the limits of this approach and wonders if there are particular languages that are not well suited for this particular architecture to write languages in. For example, some languages are read right to left or top to bottom instead of left to right. And so these models that are predict one word that comes after the other might not be necessarily best suited for this practice. And so there is an active field of research around this particular topic. I have a feeling it's only going to grow more as hopefully the AI community turns away more and more away from facial recognition technology and invests in language and other tools like that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Like I said, I feel like we learned a ton today. And so thank you so much to Josh, who created the program and answered all these techie questions. And thank you so much to the incredible performers. I think what you put into the performance is a lot of what tripped people up as far as what was what. And don't forget to check out us on tasteofscience.org, Facebook, Instagram. Check out the Poison Pen reading series. Take a look at Josh's Night Air Poetry project at thenightair.com. It's really cool. You get to interact with it and input your own stuff. I did it yesterday. And check out Rahul also has an upcoming album in September, so follow or Venmo Coyote Bloodbath for more info on that. And we're also recording right now, so the video, the full video will be available. We'll get it posted and send it out to our lovely speakers and everything as well. And make sure to keep an eye on, we'll be posting a survey right after this in the event page. So let us know what you loved about the event, what you would have added, and other topics you want to hear about, because we cover all sorts of things. We've done CSI science and space science and all sorts of things. So this is one of the more artsy ones that we get to do. And again, thank you so much to our incredible speakers, and check out everyone's stuff. Everyone keep an eye out for our new events. Stay safe, wear a mask, and thank you all so much for coming today.
Thank you.